Victoria Anderson was 17 the summer she vanished, though in her eyes she was already older than her years. She had the restless energy of a girl who'd grown up staring at the same streets too long, memorizing every crack in the sidewalks of Willow Creek, Texas. A town of just under 6,000, Willow Creek was the kind of place where people knew when your front porch light burned out or if your father's truck didn't start on Tuesday morning. To Victoria, that closeness felt less like safety and more like a cage. Her mother, Denise Anderson, worked double shifts at the diner on Main Street. Her father had left years ago, a shadow that hung in the house but never returned. Victoria and her mother lived in a sagging two-bedroom rental on the edge of town, with paint peeling from the shutters and a chain-link fence that leaned so far it seemed ready to give up. It wasn't the worst life, but it wasn't the kind Victoria wanted. She dreamed of Austin, of Dallas, of neon lights, music, and the hum of something bigger than herself. She was smart, quick-witted, but rebellious in the way small towns raise their dreamers. Teachers called her distracted. Friends called her wild. Denise called her a storm I can't outrun. By the summer of 2011, Victoria had grown tired of the routines that defined Willow Creek. Every morning, the cicadas screamed against the rising Texas heat, and every evening, the whole town seemed to close its doors by 10. The same kids drove the same pickups down Main Street, looping the Dairy Queen parking lot like it was the center of the universe. For them, maybe it was. For Victoria, it was suffocating. Her room told the story better than her words. Band posters plastered across the walls, Nirvana, Green Day, Paramore, their defiance echoing her own. A scratched-up guitar leaned against the corner, strings half broken but still played loud enough to rattle the thin walls. On her dresser, a Polaroid camera, a stack of journals, and a single folded map of Texas with Austin circled in thick black marker. Victoria wasn't close to her mother the way some daughters are. Denise loved fiercely, but her love came wrapped in exhaustion. She came home from the diner smelling like grease and coffee, her voice hoarse from shouting orders over clattering plates. She wanted Victoria to play it safe, to finish school, maybe take a few shifts at the diner herself. Victoria wanted none of it. Their fights were legendary, shouted matches that neighbors could hear through the open windows on hot nights. One night in July, the fight had been about the college fund Victoria's grandmother had left her. Denise insisted it was for tuition, for books, for building a life. Victoria had shouted back that college wasn't the life she wanted. She wanted freedom. She wanted to leave now. By the end of it, Denise had slammed her bedroom door, and Victoria had stormed out onto the porch, her eyes blazing. Her friends didn't always understand her either. She wasn't the popular girl at Willow Creek High, but she wasn't invisible. She moved between groups, the skaters, the choir kids, the drifters. Some nights she sat out by the lake, drinking cheap beer and strumming her guitar. Other nights she snuck onto the roof of the old movie theater with her best friend, Maria, and stared at the stars, talking about everything they would do if they could just get out. But Maria was different. Maria talked about leaving, but deep down she was tied to Willow Creek, her family, her church, her roots. Victoria wasn't tied to anything. She wore her restlessness like a second skin. In the days leading up to her disappearance, she left behind pieces of herself like breadcrumbs. A notebook filled with lyrics about escape. A photo of the highway she'd taken from the passenger seat of someone's car. A social media post that read simply, "This place is killing me. Watch me vanish." At the time, no one thought much of it. She was dramatic. She always had been. But looking back, those words feel like an omen. The last time most people saw Victoria was at a party by Lake Willow, a place where teenagers gathered on summer nights. It was a humid evening, the kind where the air felt thick and the crickets screamed so loudly you could barely hear yourself think. Victoria had shown up in cut-off shorts and a faded black tank top, her guitar slung across her back like a weapon. She played for a while, laughed with friends, and then argued with a boy no one could quite place. Some said it was an older guy from out of town. Others swore it was Caleb Myers, a local 20-year-old who dropped out of school years earlier. Whatever the truth, Victoria left the lake around midnight, walking toward the road that led into town. No one stopped her. No one followed her. What we know next comes from the grainy footage of a gas station security camera, time-stamped 1:12 a.m. Victoria stood beneath the harsh white glow of the canopy lights, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. She held her phone in one hand, her guitar case in the other. She looked toward the highway as though waiting for someone. That same night, she posted what would become her final words online. A photograph of the gas station lights, blurry and off-center. The caption, "Almost gone." By morning she was gone. When Denise Anderson realized her daughter hadn't come home, she called the police. At first, they dismissed it, Just another runaway, a teenager blowing off steam. But Denise knew better. Victoria had talked about leaving, yes, but she'd never leave without her journals, without her Polaroids, without at least saying goodbye. Something was wrong. In the days that followed, Willow Creek was plastered with flyers. Victoria's face stared out from utility poles and gas station windows, her dark eyes and crooked smile frozen in time. Volunteers searched the woods, the lake, the highways. Rumors spread faster than the truth, that she'd run away with an older man, that she'd overdosed, that she'd finally made it to Austin. None of it gave Denise the answers she needed. The weeks turned into months and the trail went cold. The flyers faded, the searches ended, and the town of Willow Creek moved on. But Denise never did. For her, every empty room, every silent guitar string, every summer night without Victoria was proof that her daughter's story wasn't finished. 12 years later, neither she, nor the world, would be able to ignore Victoria Anderson again. The summer before she disappeared stretched long and hot, the kind of season that bled days into one another until even time itself seemed drowsy. But for Victoria Anderson, every day carried weight. She was counting. Counting how many times she'd walked the cracked sidewalks of Willow Creek, how many sunsets she'd watched sink behind the dusty horizon, how many fights she'd have with her mother before she finally broke free. Her friends noticed the change before her family did. She grew sharper around the edges, impatient when conversations circled the same town gossip or high school drama. Maria tried to brush it off, saying, "You've always been dramatic, V." But Victoria's journal told a different story. On the pages she left behind, scrawled in messy ink, were fragments of thought that read like a storm gathering. "If I don't leave now, I'll rot here. Austin is a heartbeat away and I can hear it. Nobody understands, least of all Mom." Her mother, Denise, worked more that summer than ever before. The diner had cut staff, leaving her running double shifts. She barely noticed at first how often Victoria slipped out at night, how late she crept home, guitar slung over her shoulder. But when she did notice, the fights began. They argued about money. About responsibility. About the college fund Victoria's grandmother had left her. Denise wanted her to invest it in her future. A scholarship, books, a chance at something stable. Victoria wanted to use it as fuel for escape, a one-way ticket out of Willow Creek. "You think Austin's waiting for you with open arms?" Denise had shouted one humid night, sweat clinging to her forehead. "It's hard out there, Victoria. You'll get eaten alive." "I'd rather get eaten alive than stay here and starve," Victoria snapped back, slamming her bedroom door so hard the frame rattled. Still, beneath the sharp words was a tangle of love neither of them could untangle. Denise left notes on the fridge. "Eat something before you go out. Don't forget your sunscreen." Victoria ignored them, but she kept every scrap of paper. In her desk drawer, hidden beneath old Polaroids, the notes sat like proof that love was there, even when it came wrapped in anger. The last summer wasn't only fights and scribbled journal entries. There were nights by Lake Willow when the air smelled of wet earth and gasoline, and Victoria strummed her guitar for a circle of kids who clapped and cheered like she was already famous. There were afternoons she and Maria sprawled on the theater roof, drinking sodas and laughing until their sides ached. Maria, steady and cautious, had always been Victoria's tether. But that summer even she sensed her grip slipping. "You're serious, aren't you?" Maria asked one night, lying flat on the warm tar roof as stars glittered above them. "Serious about what?" "About leaving. About just going." Victoria turned her head, eyes reflecting the pinpricks of light above. "If I don't, I'll die here, Maria. Not literally, but in every way that matters." Maria didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them was heavy enough. Rumors swirled in town about who Victoria was spending her time with. She was seen riding in trucks with boys no one quite knew. She was spotted at a gas station on the highway, talking to someone older, someone not from Willow Creek. Her reputation began to twist in whispers. Reckless, too wild, trouble. Denise heard the whispers at the diner. She hated them, but she couldn't deny a fear lodged in her chest. Victoria was daring, and daring could turn dangerous fast. Victoria herself fed the whispers with her online presence. Her posts that summer were cryptic, flashes of restlessness bottled into words. "You ever feel like your skin doesn't fit anymore? Almost time. One day they'll see me for who I really am." Most brushed it off as teenage melodrama. But looking back, those posts read like warning flares. There were moments too when the facade cracked. Maria remembered one evening in particular when Victoria had shown up at her house, eyes red, voice trembling. She never said what happened, only that she needed to get out, and he wouldn't leave her alone. Maria pressed her, but Victoria shut down, strumming her guitar until her fingers bled rather than answering. By mid-July the tension was unbearable. Denise and Victoria barely spoke without shouting. Maria worried every day that her best friend was teetering on the edge of something irreversible. The town gossiped more, the heat pressed harder, and Victoria grew more defiant, her posts more ominous. The week before she vanished, she wrote in her journal, "I'm almost gone. I can feel it. This town will never hold me again." For 12 years, that entry would echo in her mother's memory, in Maria's guilty conscience, and in the silence of Willow Creek. At the time, no one realized they were living through Victoria Anderson's last summer. They only knew she was restless, wild, and aching to leave. What they couldn't see, what none of them understood, was that her restlessness wasn't only about freedom. It was about fear too. Fear she couldn't name, fear she didn't write about, fear she buried beneath guitar chords and social media posts. It was the kind of fear that only made sense later, when people finally pieced together the fragments of her last weeks. When they understood that somewhere in those long, hot Texas nights, someone had been watching Victoria Anderson. Waiting. And when the moment came, they made sure her last summer was truly her last. The night Victoria Anderson disappeared began like any other summer night in Willow Creek, Texas. The heat lingered long after the sun dropped, and the cicadas screamed from the trees as if they were announcing some inevitable ending. Teenagers flocked to Lake Willow, where the cracked gravel parking lot filled with pickups, the air thick with smoke and music bleeding from portable speakers. Victoria arrived late, her guitar slung across her back, her black tank top and cut-off shorts blending her into the restless crowd. She wasn't there to drink or flirt, though she did both when the mood struck. She was there because the lake was one of the few places that felt like escape. Beneath the stars, surrounded by voices and laughter, she could almost believe she wasn't trapped in Willow Creek. Friends remember her being in high spirits that night, though some later said her laughter felt sharper, her smiles edged with something unsaid. She strummed her guitar near the water's edge, drawing a circle of kids who sang along badly to songs they only half knew. For a moment she seemed untouchable, alive, burning, free. But as the night stretched on, things shifted. Around midnight, witnesses saw her arguing with someone near the treeline. Accounts varied wildly. Some swore it was Caleb Myers, the 20-year-old who had dropped out years earlier and hung around the fringes of every party, older than the rest, more dangerous. Others insisted it was someone they didn't recognize, a stranger who didn't belong. The truth was hard to pin down and memories blurred. What everyone agreed on was this: by 12:30 Victoria was gone from the lake. No one thought much of it at first. She was known to drift in and out, sometimes walking into town barefoot, guitar case banging against her knees. She'd disappear for hours, then show up on Maria's roof, hair wild, eyes blazing, stories spilling from her lips. That night seemed no different. At least not then. At 1:12 a.m., grainy footage from a gas station camera captured her under the harsh fluorescent glow of the canopy. The video was later replayed endlessly on news broadcasts, online forums and true crime documentaries. There she was, Victoria Anderson, 17, hair pulled back, wearing her dark tank top, her guitar case in one hand, her phone in the other. She shifted her weight nervously, glanced toward the highway, then back toward the gas station door. The footage was poor quality, the kind that turned faces into shadows and movements into blurs. But still, there was something unsettling in the way she kept looking over her shoulder. Minutes later she walked toward the edge of the frame, toward the road. Then she vanished into the dark. That same night, at nearly the same time, Victoria posted what would become her final words online. A photo of the gas station lights, off-center and grainy. The caption read, "Almost gone." The words would later haunt everyone who knew her. Almost gone. Almost. By dawn her room at home was empty. Her bed unslept in. Her mother Denise thought she had stayed with Maria again, or maybe fallen asleep at a friend's. But by mid-morning, Maria arrived at the Anderson house asking if Victoria was there. That was when Denise's stomach dropped. She knew something was wrong. By noon, she was at the Willow Creek Police Department, filing a missing persons report. The response was swift, but not in the way Denise hoped. The officers were polite, but dismissive. Victoria was 17, almost 18, and known for being rebellious. "She's a runaway," they said. "Give it a few days, she'll turn up." Denise argued, begged, pleaded. She wouldn't leave her journals. She wouldn't leave her Polaroids. She wouldn't just disappear without telling me. But the officers had heard it before. Teenagers vanished all the time, most by choice. And Victoria, with her fiery arguments and cryptic social media posts, fit the runaway narrative too neatly. Still, flyers were printed. Volunteers searched the woods and back roads. The gas station footage was reviewed again and again, though no one seemed to notice the shadow at the edge of the frame, the faint outline of another figure lingering by the pumps. In the days that followed, rumors spread faster than facts. Some swore they saw her hitchhiking on the highway, guitar strapped to her back. Others claimed she'd run off with an older man, that she was spotted in Dallas, maybe even Austin. A few whispered darker things, that she'd overdosed, that her body was hidden somewhere out by Lake Willow. The truth was no one knew. Maria, broken by guilt, replayed their last conversation over and over. She remembered Victoria talking about getting out, and how scared she had looked when she mentioned, "He won't leave me alone." But Maria hadn't pressed. She hadn't asked who he was. Now she wished she had. Denise refused to believe her daughter had simply run away. She plastered flyers across every gas station, diner, and church board in 3 counties. She begged local news stations to cover the story, but the spotlight faded quickly. Willow Creek wasn't a place that drew headlines, and a missing runaway didn't hold the media's attention for long. Weeks passed. The trail grew cold. The last known image of Victoria, the gas station photo and the caption, "Almost gone," became the symbol of her disappearance. For years, it lingered like a haunting echo, a puzzle no one could solve. Every time Denise saw it, she wondered what her daughter had meant. Was it a goodbye? A warning? A plea? The town eventually moved on. Friends graduated, left for college, started families. The flyers curled and yellowed. The case file gathered dust. But Denise Anderson never moved on. She clung to her daughter's belongings, her journals, her guitar, the map of Texas with Austin circled in thick marker. Every night, she replayed that summer, searching for something she missed. Victoria Anderson had walked into the Texas night and never walked back. And for 12 years that was the end of the story. Or at least that's what everyone thought. In the first days after Victoria Anderson vanished, Willow Creek was a town electrified with urgency. The air buzzed with the sound of search parties calling her name, the sight of flyers taped to every telephone pole, grocery store window, and church bulletin board. Denise Anderson stood at the center of it all, clutching stacks of black and white posters with her daughter's face printed across them, as if paper could tether Victoria back to the world. The flyer read, "Missing, Victoria Lynn Anderson, 17. Last seen at Willow Creek Gas Station, July 17, 2011. The grainy photo of Victoria, cropped from her school yearbook, showed her half-smile, the one that never quite revealed what she was thinking. Denise hated that photo. It didn't capture the fire in her daughter's eyes, the way she lit up when she laughed. But it was the only one she had that fit the format. Neighbors and strangers volunteered in droves at first. Pickup trucks filled with teenagers combed the back roads, ATVs scoured the woods, and groups with flashlights waded through tall grass by Lake Willow. They called her name until their voices were hoarse, expecting at any moment to hear her shout back, to find her huddled somewhere waiting to be rescued. But each day ended with nothing. The sheriff's department set up a tip line, though calls quickly filled with gossip instead of evidence. One caller claimed they saw Victoria hitchhiking on Highway 21. Another swore she was working at a diner 2 counties over. A third said she'd joined a traveling band. The tips gave Denise hope for hours at a time, until each one dissolved into dust. The longer Victoria was missing, the more the story shifted. At the diner where Denise worked, whispers spread like oil on water. Didn't that girl always talk about leaving town? She was wild, you know. Wouldn't surprise me if she took off. I heard she was with Caleb Myers that night. My cousin said she got into a truck with some guy from Houston. Each rumor painted Victoria differently. A runaway, a victim, a girl reckless enough to vanish into the dark by her own choice. Denise heard every word. Sometimes she ignored them, but other times she turned on the gossips with a ferocity that startled even her co-workers. "She didn't leave," she hissed one afternoon at a pair of regulars. "She didn't just decide to disappear. Something happened to my daughter and I will find out what." The police weren't much help. Sheriff Holt, an old man with thinning hair and a reputation for moving slow, repeated the same line in every press briefing. "At this time, we believe Victoria Anderson is a runaway. We have no evidence of foul play." To Denise, those words felt like a death sentence. Runaway meant the case was already cold, that her daughter's name would fade from memory as quickly as the posters curled in the Texas sun. But Denise didn't stop. She organized her own searches, printed new flyers when the old ones tore, begged local news stations to keep Victoria's story alive. For a few weeks, there were candlelight vigils outside the high school, clusters of teenagers holding candles and singing songs in her memory. Maria stood at every one, clutching a photo of her best friend, her eyes rimmed red. But even Maria was haunted. In the quiet moments, she replayed her last conversations with Victoria. The way Victoria said, "He won't leave me alone." The way her eyes darted around like someone was watching her. Maria told the police, but they brushed it off. Teenagers were dramatic, they said. Arguments happened. Breakups happened. Nothing she said was enough to make them look closer. By the end of August, the search parties dwindled. Summer ended. Kids returned to school. Flyers remained on bulletin boards but yellowed under the relentless Texas sun. Denise refused to let the case die, even when it felt like the town already had. She drove the highways herself, stopping at every gas station, asking if anyone remembered seeing her daughter. She mailed copies of the flyer to Austin, Dallas, Houston. She called the sheriff's office daily until the deputies stopped answering her calls. At home, Victoria's room stayed frozen in time. The guitar leaned in the corner, the journals stacked on the dresser, the folded map of Texas circled in thick black marker. Denise couldn't bring herself to touch a thing. Some nights, she sat on her daughter's bed, clutching a shirt that still smelled faintly of her shampoo, and prayed for a miracle. But miracles didn't come to Willow Creek. As weeks turned to months, the town's attention faded. People had their own lives, their own struggles. Victoria's disappearance became just another story, filed away in the collective memory with other tragedies that came and went. Only Denise carried the weight every day, her grief growing heavier with every unanswered question. The whispers never stopped, though. Some claimed they saw her in Austin, playing guitar on a street corner. Others swore she'd gotten involved with dangerous people. A few hinted at darker fates, whispered words like abduction and murder when they thought Denise couldn't hear. But no proof ever surfaced. No body. No clues. Just the haunting stillness of a case gone cold. 12 years later, when her daughter's name would explode across social media and strangers around the world would dissect her final post, Denise would remember this time most vividly. The summer of flyers. The months of silence. The endless cycle of rumors. It was the time when Victoria Anderson began to slip away not just from Willow Creek streets, but from the world's memory. But Denise never let go. And because she didn't, when the world finally turned its eyes back to Willow Creek, she was ready. Time moved on in Willow Creek, Texas, even if Denise Anderson could not. By the fall of 2011, the search parties had ended. By winter, the flyers had peeled away from their telephone poles, leaving only sun-bleached tape and curling edges as proof they'd ever been there. At the high school, Victoria's desk sat empty for weeks, a silent reminder of her absence, until eventually the teachers stopped acknowledging it. New kids filled the halls. Fresh gossip replaced the old. For the students who had been close to her, life pressed forward. Graduation, jobs, college applications. Victoria became a name whispered occasionally at reunions, remembered most by those who'd once shared a cigarette with her by the lake or sat on Maria's roof under the stars. For Denise there was no moving on. Each day was a ritual of hope that curdled into despair. She woke early to check her phone as if there might be a missed call from Victoria. She stopped at the post office daily hoping for a letter. She drove the back roads late at night, her headlights sweeping across empty fields, as though she might catch a glimpse of her daughter walking along the shoulder. The police did less and less as the months turned into years. When Denise called, her questions were met with flat voices. "We'll let you know if anything comes in." The deputies no longer returned her messages. The sheriff, when cornered in the diner, told her gently but firmly that cases like these don't always have neat endings. Neat endings. The phrase made Denise want to scream. Maria carried her own silence differently. She grew quieter in the months after Victoria's disappearance, her bright laughter dimming to a flicker. She kept her friends' Polaroids in a shoebox under her bed, flipping through them in the dark when she couldn't sleep. She told herself that if Victoria came back, she'd finally ask the question she hadn't before: who he was, what she meant when she said, "He won't leave me alone." But as each year passed, Maria spoke less and less about her best friend. The guilt weighed her down, but she buried it under college classes, boyfriends, and eventually a move out of Willow Creek. For the town, the silence was convenient. A missing teenager was messy. A missing teenager meant questions about safety, about responsibility. Easier to call her a runaway, to tell themselves she'd left for Austin or Dallas or anywhere else. Easier to shrug and say, she always wanted out. Denise hated them for it. She hated their whispers, their shrugs, their polite avoidance when she entered a room. To them, Victoria was gone. To Denise, Victoria was everywhere, in every corner of their home, in every country song playing from a passing truck, in every girl she saw standing at the gas station under those fluorescent lights. Holidays came and went. Each Christmas, Denise hung Victoria's stocking. Each birthday, she baked a cake, setting a slice aside as though her daughter might walk in the door at any moment. People called it denial. Denise called it survival. Occasionally there were flares of hope. A girl in Dallas matched Victoria's description. A hitchhiker on the highway was said to carry a guitar. Each time, Denise drove for hours chasing ghosts, only to return empty-handed. The case file grew thicker with false leads, thinner with real ones. By 2015, for years after Victoria vanished, even the local news had stopped covering the story. Denise's flyers were the only thing that kept her daughter's face alive, but she couldn't afford to print them as often anymore. She tacked the last batch to bulletin boards with shaking hands, knowing they'd be ripped down or forgotten within weeks. The cold silence of those years hollowed her out. Friends drifted away. Conversations with coworkers ended awkwardly. Even Maria, who visited when she could, began to avoid the subject, as though speaking Victoria's name might reopen wounds she couldn't face. But Denise never stopped speaking it. She wrote her daughter letters every week, filling notebooks with the words she couldn't send. Dear Victoria, I know you're out there. I know something happened. I promise you I'll never stop until I find you. She filled closets with these notebooks, each one a prayer and a promise. The years blurred together in monotone grief until even Denise wondered if she was chasing shadows. By the 10th anniversary of Victoria's disappearance, only a handful of people gathered at Lake Willow for the vigil. Denise lit her candle, tears streaking her face, while others bowed their heads politely but with distant eyes. In the silence that followed, Denise whispered into the night, "She's still out there. She has to be." But the world had stopped listening. It would take 12 long years, years of silence, denial, and grief, before a single flicker of light broke through the darkness. Not from the sheriff's office. Not from the town. Not even from Maria. It came instead from the internet, from strangers who had never set foot in Willow Creek. And it began with a single post. 12 years after Victoria Anderson vanished, her name had become a whisper in Willow Creek, Texas. The kind of story told in fragments, over coffee at the diner or during late-night drives around the lake. Remember that girl who disappeared? The Runaway? What was her name again? Time had eroded her memory in the town where she had once burned so brightly. But the internet does not forget so easily. It started small, with a college student scrolling through an old blog dedicated to cold cases. They stumbled on a screenshot of Victoria's final social media post. The gas station photo, off-center and grainy, those fluorescent lights glowing like a halo above cracked pavement. The caption was the same chilling fragment it had always been, almost gone. Something about it caught the student's eye. Maybe it was the haunted finality of the words. Maybe it was the expression on the girl's shadowed face, caught mid-motion like she was already stepping out of the world. They reposted it with a single line, "Why don't more people talk about this case?" The post went viral almost overnight. Twitter threads picked it apart, Reddit boards dissected it, TikTok creators made haunting videos set to eerie music, recreating the scene with dramatic flair. Strangers who had never set foot in Willow Creek became obsessed with the mystery of Victoria Anderson. Commenters argued endlessly. Some were certain she was a runaway. Others believed she had been abducted. A few swore the gas station footage showed more than one figure in the shadows. Screenshots of the grainy video spread like wildfire, with amateur sleuths drawing red circles and arrows on blurry stills, convinced they had found evidence missed by the police. Theories ranged from plausible to outrageous. One thread argued she had joined a cult. Another claimed she'd been trafficked through truck stops across Texas. A handful even spun conspiracies involving cover-ups, claiming the sheriff's office had deliberately ignored leads. For Denise, it was like reopening a wound that had never healed. One evening, Maria called her, voice trembling, "Denise, don't freak out, but Victoria's case, it's all over the internet." Denise sat in silence, the words echoing. For 12 years, she had fought to keep her daughter's name alive, and now strangers were doing it for her. It was both terrifying and a relief. Terrifying because the world was dissecting her daughter like a puzzle piece. Relief because, for the first time in years, people were finally looking again. Within a week, Victoria's name was trending nationally. Reporters reached out to Denise asking for interviews. True crime podcasts replayed the story in dramatic detail. Old classmates were contacted, their memories suddenly valuable. Maria was asked for comment, though she declined, unable to put into words the guilt that still gnawed at her. Then something unexpected happened. A man in his 30s, scrolling through Facebook one night, recognized the gas station photo. Not Victoria herself, but the truck. Parked in the background of the grainy image, half hidden by glare, was a pickup he swore he remembered. His uncle had driven that same model in 2011. A beat-up Ford, distinctive for its rusted passenger side door. The man hesitated for days before coming forward. He wasn't sure what he'd seen. But eventually, after watching video after video about the case, he sent a message to one of the online forums. "I think I know who was there that night." It was the crack in the silence Denise had been waiting 12 years to hear. News spread quickly. The witness agreed to speak with investigators, though he admitted his memory was hazy. Still, his claim reignited the case. If the truck in the background really belonged to who he thought it did, then someone who lived in Willow Creek had been at the gas station the night Victoria vanished. For the online sleuths, it was blood in the water. They dug through property records, Facebook photos, and old yearbooks trying to link names to faces to trucks. Theories piled higher. But for Denise, one detail mattered more than all the speculation. Finally, someone else was confirming what she had always believed. Victoria hadn't just walked into the night on her own. Someone had been there. Maria couldn't escape it either. She tried to avoid the flood of posts, but her phone lit up with notifications anyway. Messages from strangers, journalists, even old classmates. Every time she saw that final photo, she felt the same crushing guilt. She had known Victoria was afraid of someone. She had heard her friends say, "He won't leave me alone." And now, after 12 years, the internet was beginning to ask the same question Maria had been too scared to. Who was he? Denise clung to the hope that the sudden wave of attention might finally force the authorities to act. For years she had been dismissed, told her daughter was a runaway, told to let it go. Now the world was demanding answers. The sheriff's office could no longer stay silent. A press conference was held in late August of 2023. The sheriff, gray-haired and visibly uncomfortable, confirmed that new information had come to light and that investigators were re-examining all available evidence. To Denise it was little more than lip service. She had heard those words before. But this time things were different. This time millions of eyes were watching. The silence of 12 years was broken. And the flood was only beginning. The man's name was Daniel Ruiz. He was 34 now, a mechanic living 2 towns over from Willow Creek, but in July of 2011 he had been 22, restless and reckless, running with the wrong crowd. He hadn't thought about that night in years, not until Victoria Anderson's face reappeared on his phone screen, her haunting caption plastered across the internet, "Almost gone." At first, Daniel tried to ignore it. What could he possibly add after all this time? Memory was slippery, and his was muddied by too many late nights and too much beer. But the more he saw the image, the more the background gnawed at him. The truck. That old, dented Ford. Rust blooming like a bruise along the passenger side door. He knew that truck as well as he knew his own hands. It had belonged to his uncle, Ray Ruiz. And Ray had been there that night. Daniel hadn't meant to see it. He'd been driving back from a party in Bastrop, a little drunk, when he swung by the Willow Creek gas station for smokes. He remembered pulling in, the glare of the fluorescent lights washing over the cracked asphalt. And there, leaning against Ray's truck, was a girl with a guitar case. Victoria Anderson. He hadn't known her by name then, but he recognized her now from the flyers, from the endless posts online. The girl with the fire in her eyes, who would vanish into the dark just hours later. Ray had been talking to her. His uncle was older, mid-40s, a man with a short temper and a long history of trouble. Daniel remembered the way Victoria's body language screamed discomfort. Her arms crossed tight, her shoulders hunched. Ray leaned too close. She took a step back. Daniel hadn't thought much of it at the time. Ray was always too friendly with younger women, always pushing boundaries. But now, with 12 years of hindsight, the memory curdled in his gut. When Daniel first posted his observation online, he didn't give names. He just mentioned the truck, that he remembered it from that night. The internet exploded, theories spinning out of control. But soon after, reporters started digging, and Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots. Finally, he reached out to the sheriff's office. Sitting in a stuffy interview room, he told them what he remembered: the truck, the girl, his Uncle Ray. The deputies listened, stone-faced. They asked him why he had never come forward before. "I didn't know who she was," Daniel muttered. "I didn't know she'd gone missing until weeks later. And by then it felt too late." Nobody was asking any more. The deputies exchanged a look. One leaned in. "Are you saying your Uncle Ray Ruiz was the last person to see Victoria Anderson alive?" The weight of the question pressed down on him. He hesitated, then nodded. "I think so." News of the witness broke within days. Headlines screamed across Texas, "New lead in cold case of missing teen." Reporters camped outside Daniel's house, cameras flashing. Neighbors whispered. Some praised him for finally speaking up. Others called him a coward for waiting 12 years. Denise Anderson didn't care about the timing. For the first time in over a decade, she had a name. Ray Ruiz. A man who had stood feet away from her daughter on the night she vanished. A man who had never been questioned. Maria, reading the news on her phone, felt her stomach drop. The words echoed in her head like a gunshot. "He won't leave me alone." She remembered Victoria saying that weeks before she disappeared, her eyes clouded with fear. Could it have been Ray Ruiz all along? The internet did what it always did. It swarmed. Armchair detectives dug into Ray's past. They unearthed mugshots for bar fights, records of DUIs, whispers of harassment that had never stuck. They traced his last known address, plastered his face across TikTok. Some posts blurred the line between curiosity and vigilante justice, turning Ray into a villain before he had even been questioned publicly. The sheriff's office, pressured from all sides, confirmed that they were looking into individuals of interest. They didn't say Ray's name, but they didn't have to. The world already had it. Daniel couldn't escape the storm. Guilt chewed at him, keeping him awake at night. He replayed that evening in his head like a broken film reel. Ray leaning close, Victoria stepping back, the unease radiating from her body. He wondered if he could have done something. If speaking up 12 years earlier might have changed everything. He began drinking again, drowning in what-ifs. He confessed to friends that he was terrified. "Ray's not the kind of man who forgives," he said. "If he knows I talked." His voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. For Denise, the revelation was a spark in the darkness. She pinned Ray's name to the wall above her desk, alongside every other scrap of paper she had collected over the years. She traced lines between the gas station footage, the truck, the witness account. Her grief was suddenly sharpened into rage. For 12 years she had begged for someone to look closer. And now, when the answer had been right in front of them all along, the world was finally paying attention. But beneath her hope lay a chilling question. If Ray Ruiz had been with Victoria that night, where was she now? The silence of 12 years had been broken. But the truth was still buried deep, and digging it up would come at a cost. Ray Ruiz had always been a man people crossed the street to avoid. In Willow Creek, his name carried a weight, a mixture of fear and resignation. He'd grown up there, the kind of boy who broke things just to watch them fall apart, and he never outgrew it. By the time Victoria Anderson vanished in 2011, Ray was in his mid-40s, a man with a record of bar fights, harassment charges that never stuck, and a reputation for making people uncomfortable. 4 years he'd managed to skate by, never quite crossing the line far enough to face real consequences. He was a ghost on the fringes of town life, the man muttering in the back booth of the bar, the figure loitering by the gas station, the presence everyone felt but nobody wanted to confront. When his name surfaced in connection to Victoria's disappearance, it was like the entire town exhaled the breath it had been holding for 12 years. Whispers turned sharp. Of course it was Ray. Who else could it have been? The sheriff's office moved slowly at first, cautious under the weight of national attention. Investigators interviewed Daniel Ruiz again, pressing him for details. Did he see Ray drive away with Victoria? Did he hear their conversation? Daniel, sweating under the fluorescent lights of the interview room, admitted he couldn't remember the words. He only remembered the look on Victoria's face, tight, defensive, scared. That alone was enough to reopen the case. Search warrants followed. Deputies combed through Ray's old properties, searching for anything that might link him to Victoria. Abandoned sheds, rusted-out vehicles, even dry creek beds were sifted for bones. Drone footage captured the search crews moving across the Texas scrubland, broadcast on the evening news. For Denise Anderson, it was torture and hope in equal measure. The town divided quickly. Some were certain Ray was guilty. Others bristled at the public trial happening online. In the bar where Ray still drank most nights, old friends muttered about witch hunts, about how the internet was railroading a man with nothing but rumor and memory. But even they kept their voices low, careful not to draw attention. Ray himself didn't stay silent. When reporters finally cornered him outside a gas station, he glared into the cameras, his voice sharp and venomous. "I don't know that girl," he spat. "Never seen her in my life. This is all lies. Some punk nephew of mine trying to ruin me." But the footage told another story. Online sleuths slowed down the gas station video, brightening the shadows, overlaying the grainy outline of the truck with photos from Ray's old Facebook page. The match was undeniable. That rusted passenger side door. That same fort. The internet had no doubts. Denise Anderson watched the clip on her computer, her hands trembling. She remembered all the years the sheriff had dismissed her, telling her Victoria was a runaway. Now here it was, proof she hadn't been wrong. Proof that someone in Willow Creek had known more all along. Maria saw the same clip and couldn't stop shaking. She thought of Victoria's words again. He won't leave me alone. For the first time, Maria said the name out loud, whispering it into the dark of her apartment. Ray. It was Ray. The sheriff's office called Ray a person of interest. Not a suspect. Not yet. But to the world watching, the line didn't matter. Pressure mounted. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse demanding justice. Journalists camped outside Ray's house. His face spread across TikTok, turned into memes, into hashtags. Ray grew angrier, more erratic. Neighbors reported him shouting at night, throwing bottles at stray dogs. The tension in Willow Creek was palpable. Denise lived in that tension every day. She drove past the gas station again and again, staring at the glowing canopy where her daughter had last been seen. She thought about that final caption, almost gone. Had Victoria known she was in danger? Had she tried to warn them? Investigators dug deeper. Old complaints surfaced. Women who had felt unsafe around Ray, nights when he lingered outside the bar long after closing. Nothing that had ever stuck, but together, it painted a picture. Still, there was no body. No weapon. No physical evidence linking him to Victoria. That was the cruel truth of cold cases. Memory was fragile, evidence faded, and time buried answers deep. But Denise couldn't let go of the hope that, somewhere in the shadows of Willow Creek, the truth was still waiting. And if Ray Ruiz was the key, she would not rest until he unlocked it. For 12 years, Ray Ruiz had lived without anyone asking him about the night Victoria Anderson vanished. Now, under the weight of national attention, investigators began to pull at the threads of his life. Ray insisted he had nothing to do with it. When questioned, he told deputies he hadn't even been in Willow Creek that night. He claimed he was in Bastrop, 2 hours away, playing cards in the back room of a friend's bar until sunrise. It was a story he had told himself for so long that it rolled easily off his tongue. But investigators weren't just listening, they were checking. They tracked down the men Ray claimed had been with him. At first, his old drinking buddies backed him up, repeating the story. But under pressure, the cracks began to show. One admitted he hadn't actually seen Ray until well after midnight. Another confessed he couldn't remember what year the card game had even taken place. The alibi began to wobble. Then came the receipt. While combing through old records, an investigator found a purchase made at the Willow Creek gas station at 1:14 a.m. on July 17, 2011, the exact night Victoria disappeared. The card used belonged to Ray Ruiz. The evidence wasn't ironclad. A receipt didn't prove what he had done after he swiped his card. But it demolished his alibi. Ray hadn't been 2 hours away in Bastrop. He had been right there in Willow Creek at the gas station where Victoria was last seen alive. The news hit Denise Anderson like a bolt of electricity. She had sat through years of silence, years of hearing the sheriff's department insist her daughter was a runaway. Now, finally, there was something concrete. She held the printed article in her hands and whispered, "I knew it. I knew it." Maria's reaction was different. She sat in her apartment, staring at the headline, shaking. The memory of Victoria's words echoed louder than ever. "He won't leave me alone." Maria realized with sickening certainty that Victoria had tried to tell her. And she had failed to listen. The town itself was split. Some were stunned, muttering in church pews and grocery store aisles about the man they had avoided for years now being at the center of a national storm. Others doubled down, insisting it was all a witch hunt. "That girl wanted to run away," one man muttered at the diner. "Ray had nothing to do with it. People just want someone to blame." But the weight of evidence was shifting. Detectives pulled surveillance footage again, running the grainy gas station tape through modern software. It wasn't perfect, but enhancements revealed more than anyone had seen in 2011. The faint shadow in the corner of the frame, once dismissed as noise, now clearly showed the outline of a man near the truck. Not just any man. His build, his stance, his clothing all matched Ray Ruiz. Still, Ray didn't break. When confronted, he leaned back in the interview chair, arms folded across his chest, his voice dripping with venom. "So I was at the gas station," he sneered. "So what? That ain't a crime. Girl wanted a ride maybe. I don't remember. You can't pin nothing on me." But his anger betrayed him. Investigators noted how quickly he snapped at Victoria's name, how defensive he grew with every question. It was as if the memory of that night was not gone but buried, and now the digging was getting too close. The internet seized on every new detail. True crime forums lit up with timelines, maps, and theories. Amateur sleuths overlaid Ray's truck with Google Street View captures, matching dents and rust patterns like forensic scientists. TikTok creators replayed the gas station footage, pointing to the shadowy figure with captions like, "How was this missed for 12 years?" Daniel Ruiz, watching from the sidelines, felt his guilt deepen. He remembered the way Victoria had looked that night, the way she stepped back as Ray leaned closer. He wondered if she had been asking for help without words, and if he had been too blind, too careless, too young to see it. Denise, meanwhile, grew restless. Evidence was mounting, but she had lived long enough with disappointment to know that cases didn't always end neatly. She had seen stories collapse under insufficient evidence. She had seen suspects walk free. One night, she sat at her kitchen table, Victoria's journal spread around her, the glow of her laptop screen reflecting in her tired eyes. She whispered a promise into the stillness, "I won't let them bury this again. Not this time." Investigators pressed harder, tracing Ray's movements not just on the night Victoria vanished, but in the days after. They discovered he had abruptly sold the old Ford pickup within weeks, claiming he needed the money. The truck had since been scrapped, lost to rust and time. But its sudden disappearance raised more questions than answers. Neighbors recalled strange details: Ray burning trash late at night, Ray scrubbing the truck bed clean with a hose. Small, unsettling fragments that, together, built a darker picture. But the most chilling discovery came from Maria. After years of burying her guilt, she finally pulled out the shoebox of Polaroids she had kept of Victoria. She flipped through them one by one until her breath caught in her throat. There, in the corner of one photo taken weeks before Victoria vanished, was the unmistakable outline of Ray Ruiz standing near the lake, watching from a distance. He had been there before. Watching. Waiting. And suddenly the cracks in the alibi weren't cracks anymore. They were a doorway into the truth. Maria Gonzalez had carried silence like a second skin for 12 years. She told herself she had been protecting Victoria's memory, that speaking out about her last message would only turn her friend into gossip fodder. But the truth was more complicated. She had been afraid, of not being believed, of dragging herself into something darker, of realizing too late what those words really meant. Now, with Ray Ruiz's name on every headline and his alibi falling apart, Maria couldn't push the memories away any longer. The guilt pressed harder than ever, until it felt like she could hardly breathe. It was late on a Wednesday night when she finally opened her laptop and began to type an email to the sheriff's office. Her fingers trembled over the keys as she wrote. "In 2011, Victoria sent me a message before she disappeared. She said, 'He won't leave me alone.'" I think she was talking about Ray Ruiz. When she hit send, Maria felt something shift inside her. The fear didn't vanish, but the crushing weight of silence began to ease. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. The next morning, 2 detectives showed up at her apartment. Maria let them in, clutching the Polaroid she had found in her shoebox. She placed it on the table between them. The photo was faded, the edges curling, but the outline in the corner was clear enough. A figure standing near the lake, half hidden, watching. "That's him," Maria whispered. "That's Ray. He used to hang around. I didn't think much of it back then. None of us did." She shook her head. But she knew. She felt it. The detectives exchanged a glance. The Polaroid wasn't proof, but combined with the message and the other evidence, it painted a chilling pattern. Ray hadn't just stumbled across Victoria on the night she vanished. He had been circling her, watching, inserting himself into her world long before. Word of Maria's testimony spread quickly, both in town and online. Denise Anderson heard it first from a reporter who called her at home. She sat in silence, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles whitened. "He won't leave me alone." The words hit her like a knife. All those years she had begged the sheriff's department to look deeper, and the answer had been sitting unspoken in Maria's memory. That night, Denise drove to the edge of town, to the field where the lights of Willow Creek faded into blackness. She pulled over and stared at the empty road, the same road her daughter had walked down for the last time. She whispered into the darkness, "You weren't just running. You were running from him." The realization was devastating. All those birthdays missed, all the holidays with an empty chair, and the whole time the man responsible had been right there, drinking in town, living freely. Back in Willow Creek, the town buzzed with unease. People replayed memories with new eyes. A woman remembered Ray showing up at her workplace years ago, lingering too long, asking too many questions. A former classmate of Victoria's recalled seeing Ray's truck parked near the school more than once. What had seemed like odd but harmless moments now carried a sinister weight. But not everyone was ready to believe. In the bar where Ray still sat most nights, his defenders grumbled about Maria's timing. "Why wait 12 years?" one man scoffed. "She's making it up for attention." The words spread like smoke, bitter and dismissive, but beneath the bluster, even his supporters shifted uncomfortably. Ray himself grew angrier. When asked about Maria's testimony, he exploded, his face twisted with rage. "That girl's a liar. They're all liars. I never touched Victoria, never even spoke to her. This is all some game to ruin me." His denial only fueled the online firestorm, his fury dissected frame by frame on social media. Meanwhile, detectives kept digging. They retraced Victoria's last known movements with Maria's account in mind. Suddenly, things clicked into place. The gas station sighting, the cryptic caption, the truck disappearing weeks later. Victoria hadn't been running toward freedom that night. She had been running from fear. Denise sat with Maria a few days later, the first time they had spoken in years. The conversation was raw, filled with both anger and sorrow. "Why didn't you say something?" Denise asked, her voice trembling. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know what it meant back then. I thought she was just venting. By the time I realized it could have been important, it felt too late. And then I was afraid no one would believe me. I failed her." Denise wanted to lash out, to tell Maria that her silence had cost them years. But when she saw the way Maria's shoulders hunched under the weight of guilt, she stopped. They were both grieving in different ways. They were both carrying scars from that night. "She was scared," Denise said softly. "And she trusted you enough to say it. That means something. You're the reason people are finally listening." Maria nodded, wiping her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully. But it was a start. For the first time in 12 years, Denise felt like the tide had turned. The silence was breaking, the truth bleeding out into the open. Yet with that truth came a darker realization. If Ray had been stalking Victoria, if he had been circling her for weeks, then her disappearance wasn't random. It was deliberate. Planned. And that meant there might be more to uncover. Late that night, Denise found herself awake, staring at her daughter's journals. She flipped through pages of teenage dreams, frustrations, and scattered drawings. Then she stopped at one entry, dated just a week before the disappearance. "He keeps showing up. I don't know what he wants. I told him to go away." He laughed. "I feel like I can't breathe when he's near. I can't tell Mom. She won't understand." Almost gone. Denise's hands shook as she read. Victoria had left them clues, breadcrumbs, but no one had seen them until now. Now, finally, the shadows of the past were giving way to light. But light had a way of exposing things darker than anyone was prepared to see. The sheriff's office hadn't seen this kind of mobilization in decades. By dawn, Willow Creek was buzzing with unmarked SUVs, search dogs straining at their leashes, and volunteers in neon vests gathering near the high school football field. The town that had once buried Victoria's memory now became the stage for her possible return. The new testimony from Maria Gonzalez, combined with Ray Ruiz's unraveling alibi, gave investigators something they hadn't had in 12 years: direction. For the first time, they could point to specific areas instead of searching blindly. The focus was a swath of scrubland just outside town, a stretch of cedar and mesquite trees, dotted with rusted-out farm equipment and long-abandoned sheds. It was land Ray Ruiz had worked on as a younger man. Land he knew well. Denise Anderson stood at the edge of the search zone, clutching Victoria's journal to her chest. Her presence had been requested, though no one said why. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was to keep her close when the unthinkable was found. Either way, she refused to stay home. She watched as the K-9 units spread out, their handlers sweeping through the brush with careful precision. Every bark, every sudden stop made her heart seize. For years she had begged them to look. Now the ground itself might finally yield the truth. Maria stood a few feet away, wringing her hands, guilt still etched on her face. She hadn't wanted to come, but Denise had insisted. "If she trusted you with her words," Denise had said, "then you're part of this too." The search stretched into hours. Drones circled overhead, scanning the tree line, while deputies pushed deeper into the tangled undergrowth. Reporters hovered beyond the police tape, their cameras capturing every movement, every tense pause. By midday, a deputy's shout cut through the air. Something had been found. Denise's knees nearly gave out as she hurried forward, only to be stopped by a detective. "Ma'am, you can't go in there," he said gently, his hands firm but kind. She could only stand in the heat, her pulse hammering in her ears, as investigators gathered around a shallow depression in the earth. The ground had been disturbed, the soil darker, looser than the surrounding dirt. It was the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it, unless you had a reason to hide something. The dogs circled, whining, their noses pressing into the earth. One let out a sharp bark, then another. The sound carried through the crowd like a warning bell. It wasn't a body they unearthed that afternoon, not yet. But it was something. Cloth. Shreds of fabric buried in the soil, faded and torn. A pale blue cotton, stiff with time and dirt. Maria gasped when she saw it. That's her shirt. I swear it is. She wore it the week before. She stopped herself, covering her mouth with shaking hands. Denise leaned forward, her eyes burning. She remembered that shirt too. Victoria had worn it to church one Sunday, knotted at the waist, rolling her eyes at her mother's disapproving glance. The soil also yielded a bracelet, cheap plastic beads spelling out the word hope. Denise recognized it instantly. She had given it to Victoria for her 15th birthday. Her chest heaved as the deputies lifted it into an evidence bag. Proof. Proof that Victoria had been there. Proof that Ray's shadow wasn't just suspicion anymore. News spread quickly, and by evening the find was plastered across television screens and Twitter feeds. Hashtags like #JusticeForVictoria trended nationwide. For strangers online it was fuel for theories. For Denise it was a dagger and a bomb all at once. Ray Ruiz was taken in for questioning again. This time his rage was volcanic. He pounded the table, his face red, veins bulging at his temples. You planted that. You're all framing me. I never touched that girl, you hear me? His words echoed in the sterile interview room, but his fury rang hollow against the growing tide of evidence. Back in Willow Creek, people whispered that it was over, that Ray would finally be charged. But Denise knew better. A shirt and a bracelet were pieces, not the whole picture. Without Victoria's remains, without something irrefutable, the case could still crumble. That night, Denise sat on her porch, the bracelet clasped in her palm. She closed her eyes and imagined Victoria's hand, the way she used to twist the beads absent-mindedly when she was nervous. The image cut her to pieces. Maria sat with her, silent for a long time before finally speaking. If I had said something back then, maybe they would have found this sooner. Maybe. Denise shook her head, her voice firm. Don't. We can't live in maybes. We live in what we have now. And now we're closer than we've ever been. The words were meant to soothe, but deep down, Denise felt the chilling weight of what was still missing. The ground had spoken, but not loudly enough. Somewhere out there, Victoria was waiting to be found. And until she was, none of them could rest. The night after the discovery in the field, Willow Creek was restless. The town had always been quiet after dark, its streets rolling up early, but now there was a nervous energy in the air. People whispered in parking lots, hovered around televisions, scrolled their phones until their eyes burned. The blue shirt and bracelet had torn open old wounds and lit a fire under the community. Everyone had an opinion and nobody was keeping it to themselves. In the grocery store, Denise overheard two women whispering, "They finally got him. That man's been guilty since day one." At the diner, another voice barked, "It doesn't prove anything. Just because her stuff's out there doesn't mean Ray killed her." The town was splitting down the middle and Ray Ruiz was the fault line. Ray himself was cracking. The man who once skulked in corners, muttering threats under his breath, was now in the spotlight. Every step he took was followed by cameras, every word twisted into headlines. He barked at reporters, shoved photographers, screamed profanities when strangers shouted, "Murderer!" from across the street. Inside the sheriff's office, investigators watched the footage with grim satisfaction. Rage was dangerous, but it was also telling. And the more Ray unraveled, the clearer it became that he wasn't just angry at being accused. He was terrified of what might surface next. Denise Anderson sat in her kitchen, the bracelet in her palm, unable to sleep. Her hands shook as she turned the beads over and over. She could still picture Victoria wearing it, laughing with her friends, rolling her eyes at her mother's lectures. That small object, once so ordinary, now felt like both a relic and a weapon, proof of her daughter's life and her daughter's loss. At 3 a.m. she broke. She grabbed her car keys and drove. The town blurred past her as she sped toward Ray Ruiz's house, a sagging single-story structure on the outskirts of Willow Creek. The yard was littered with rusting tools and beer cans, the porch light flickering faintly. She pulled over at the curb, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to scream. She wanted to pound on his door and demand answers. She wanted him to feel the years of pain he had inflicted on her family. But she didn't move. She sat there gripping the steering wheel, her body trembling, staring at the house where the man she believed had stolen her daughter still lived freely. Finally, she whispered into the silence, "I won't let you win. Not anymore." Then she turned the car around and drove back home, the beads of the bracelet cutting into her palm. The next morning, a different kind of storm hit. A local radio station leaked that the sheriff's office had enough to consider an arrest. Within hours, crowds began to gather outside the courthouse. Some held signs demanding justice for Victoria. Others carried posters warning about false accusations and mob rule. The air was thick with anger, grief, and anticipation. Maria stood in the crowd, her heart pounding. She had never been one for protests, but she couldn't stay home while the town tore itself apart over the girl who had once been her closest friend. She carried no sign, made no noise, she was just there, her presence a silent vow that she would see this through, however it ended. Ray arrived at the courthouse later that afternoon, summoned for another round of questioning. He stormed through the crowd with deputies at his sides, his face twisted with fury. People shouted his name, spat accusations, shoved their phones into his path. One woman screamed, "Where is she, Ray? Where's Victoria?" For a moment Ray stopped. His eyes darted wildly, his lips pressed into a tight line. It was only a second, but it was enough. Cameras captured it, froze it, replayed it endlessly online. To strangers watching from afar, that flicker of panic looked like guilt. Inside the courthouse, the questioning dragged on for hours. Ray refused to bend, clinging to his denials, but the cracks were showing. His timeline didn't add up. His stories contradicted each other. His fury spilled over in violent bursts, forcing detectives to pause more than once. By evening, the sheriff held a press conference. The town held its breath as the cameras rolled. "We have substantial evidence linking Ray Ruiz to the disappearance of Victoria Anderson," the sheriff said, his voice steady but grave. "This investigation is ongoing, and while we cannot release all details at this time, I can confirm that the case is moving forward." It wasn't an arrest, not yet. But it was the strongest statement the department had ever made. For Denise, watching at home, it was both vindication and torment. Progress, yes, but still no body. Still no closure. That night, Denise dreamed of Victoria. She saw her daughter standing in the middle of the road, the blue shirt glowing faintly in the moonlight, the bracelet glinting on her wrist. Victoria's lips moved, but no sound came. Denise reached for her, screaming, but her daughter only shook her head, her eyes full of warning. Then she turned and vanished into the darkness. Denise woke sobbing, the sound tearing through the stillness of her empty house. She pressed the bracelet to her chest and whispered, "I'll find you. I promise." The town of Willow Creek was at its breaking point. The search had reignited old wounds, suspicion gnawed at every corner, and Ray Ruiz was teetering between rage and collapse. Everyone knew something was coming. Something big. And none of them were ready for the way the truth would finally break through. The morning broke hot and heavy, the kind of Texas heat that made the air shimmer over the asphalt. By 8 a.m., the search teams were already out again, fanning across the scrubland where Victoria's shirt and bracelet had been found. The sheriff's office had brought in cadaver dogs from Austin, specialists trained to sniff out what the earth had kept hidden for years. Denise Anderson waited at the command center, her coffee untouched, her stomach in knots. Every morning since the search had restarted, she woke with the same mix of dread and fragile hope. She wanted answers, but she feared the answer most of all. By mid-morning, the radio crackled with urgency. One of the dogs had alerted near the edge of a dry creek bed, less than a mile from where the bracelet had surfaced. The team moved quickly, staking the ground, clearing brush, marking the area with yellow flags. Denise watched from the perimeter as deputies huddled around the spot. The sight of shovels breaking into the soil made her knees tremble. She felt Maria's hand slip into hers, grounding her, though neither woman spoke. Minutes stretched into hours. Every scrape of metal against dirt seemed to echo like thunder. Then came the call. "Sheriff," a deputy's voice rang out. "We've got something." The search halted. Denise held her breath as evidence bags were carried carefully to the command tent. Word spread through the crowd of volunteers and press in whispers. "Remains." The announcement was measured, clinical. Human bones had been found. Forensic confirmation would take time, but the location, the items recovered, the timeline, all pointed to one truth. They had found Victoria Anderson. Denise collapsed into a chair, her body shaking with sobs. For 12 years she had lived with a wound that never healed. Now at last the wound had been cut open again, raw and searing but no longer empty. Her daughter had been found. Maria wept beside her, the guilt of silence crashing down. "She's home," she whispered. "Finally she's home." News of the discovery ripped through Willow Creek like wildfire. Strangers gathered outside the courthouse, laying flowers, candles and handwritten notes beneath a hastily made banner. "Justice for Victoria." But while the town mourned, investigators sharpened their focus. Forensic experts worked through the night, examining the shallow grave. They found more than bones. Among the dirt and roots was a rusted chain, fragments of duct tape, and the remnants of a tarp. The grave was not random. It was deliberate. Planned. Someone had taken the time to hide her. And only one man had the motive, the opportunity, and the history to explain it. Ray Ruiz was arrested 2 days later. Deputies arrived at his house at dawn, sirens dark, lights flashing against the peeling paint of his porch. He emerged in handcuffs, his face twisted in rage, shouting curses as neighbors watched from behind curtains. "It's a setup," he screamed. "I didn't kill her. You hear me? I didn't kill her." But his words carried no weight anymore. The town that once avoided his gaze now looked at him with disgust. The internet exploded with footage of his arrest, hashtags demanding his conviction trending within hours. For Denise the moment was surreal. She had imagined it countless times, the day the man who stole her daughter would finally face justice. Yet as she watched him shoved into the back of a cruiser, she felt no triumph. Only a hollow ache. Nothing could bring Victoria back. Nothing could erase the years of loss. That night, Denise sat in her living room surrounded by photos of her daughter. The blue shirt. The bracelet. The smile that never dimmed even in grainy Polaroids. She whispered a prayer through her tears. "They can't silence you anymore, baby. The world knows now." Maria visited, sitting quietly at the kitchen table. She brought with her a shoebox, the one filled with old photos and notes from their teenage years. Together the two women went through them, piece by piece, laughing through tears at memories too precious to keep locked away. For the first time, Denise didn't see Maria as the girl who had stayed silent. She saw her as the friend who had finally given her daughter's voice back. The town began to heal in small, fragile ways. Candlelight vigils lit up the courthouse steps. Strangers left flowers at the gas station where Victoria was last seen. Social media was flooded not just with theories and outrage, but with tributes, artwork, poems, videos celebrating her life. But beneath the mourning, the trial loomed. Ray Ruiz's arrest was only the beginning. The defense would fight, evidence would be challenged and questions would linger. Yet for the first time in 12 years, Denise felt like the truth had been unearthed. Victoria wasn't just a runaway anymore. She wasn't a forgotten flyer curling on a bulletin board. She was a daughter, a friend, a life stolen, and finally, a name that demanded justice. As Denise stood at her daughter's grave for the first time, the sun dipping low on the horizon, she whispered the word she had carried for more than a decade. "I found you." And though the ache in her chest remained, for the first time she felt like she could breathe. The courthouse in Travis County had seen its share of high-profile cases, but nothing quite like this. By the time the trial of Ray Ruiz began, Willow Creek had become a household name across Texas and far beyond. Satellite vans lined the courthouse square. Journalists camped outside with microphones and cameras, ready to beam each development into living rooms around the world. For Denise Anderson, stepping into that courtroom was like walking into the heart of a storm. She took her seat in the front row, her hands clenched tightly around a tissue, her face pale but resolute. She had waited 12 years for this moment, 12 years of being dismissed, doubted, and silenced. Now at last she would see her daughter's story told in full. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. They projected photos onto large screens, the faded blue shirt, the beaded bracelet, the shallow grave where Victoria's remains were found. Each image was a knife to Denise's chest, but she forced herself to look, to absorb every detail. Then came the witnesses. Maria Gonzalez took the stand, her voice trembling as she recounted the message Victoria had sent her the night she vanished. "He won't leave me alone." She spoke of the guilt she had carried, of the fear that had silenced her for so long. The courtroom hung on her every word. The defense tried to paint her as unreliable, accusing her of making up the story for attention, pointing to the 12-year gap between the message and her testimony. But Maria didn't waver. She looked the jury in the eyes and said, "I failed her once. I won't fail her again." Daniel Ruiz, Ray's nephew, followed. He told the court what he had seen that night. His uncle leaning into Victoria's space, her body tense and defensive. He admitted his own shame at not realizing the danger. The courtroom was silent as he described the look on her face. Not annoyance, not teenage rebellion, but fear. Experts testified next. A forensic anthropologist detailed the condition of Victoria's remains, explaining how the shallow grave and tarp pointed to concealment rather than accident. A forensic analyst showed how enhancements of the gas station footage revealed Ray's figure lurking near the truck. Another specialist confirmed that the credit card receipt placed him in Willow Creek at the exact time he claimed he was in Bastrop. Piece by piece, the prosecution built their story. A man with a history of predatory behavior, a teenager who felt trapped and afraid, and a night that ended in silence and shallow earth. Ray Ruiz sat at the defense table, his face a mask of fury. He glared at each witness, his fists clenching whenever his name was spoken. When his lawyer finally put him on the stand, he erupted with denial. "They're all liars," he shouted. "This is a setup, you hear me? I didn't kill that girl. I never touched her. They planted that grave, they planted all of it." His voice rose to a roar, his face red, spittle flying as he pounded the witness stand. The judge banged her gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. The jury stared at him, their faces unreadable but grim. Denise watched from the gallery, her heart hammering. She had imagined this man in her nightmares for years. To see him so unhinged, so consumed by rage, filled her not with fear but with a strange, steady calm. He was no longer a shadow lurking in the background. He was exposed, naked in his guilt. Closing arguments came swiftly. The prosecution's words rang through the courtroom. For 12 years, Victoria Anderson was denied justice. For 12 years, her mother was told to stop asking questions. But the truth was always there. Ray Ruiz stalked her, cornered her, and took her life. He thought time would bury his crime. But time has given Victoria a voice. And now it's time to listen. The defense argued weakly about lack of DNA evidence, about the unreliability of memory, about coincidence and suspicion. But even as they spoke, it felt like smoke dissipating into the air. The weight of evidence, the testimony, the rage of the accused himself, it all pointed one way. The jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned, the air in the courtroom was so thick Denise could barely breathe. She gripped Maria's hand as the foreman rose, the verdict form trembling in his grip. "On the charge of murder," he read, his voice steady, "we find the defendant, Ray Ruiz, guilty." The words hit Denise like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down her face as the courtroom erupted. Some cried, some gasped, others clapped before the judge silenced them with her gavel. Ray shouted profanities as deputies restrained him, his voice drowned out by the sound of justice finally spoken aloud. Denise closed her eyes, whispering a prayer of thanks. For the first time in 12 years, she felt her daughter's presence not as a haunting absence, but as a light beside her. Later, standing outside the courthouse, Denise faced the sea of cameras and microphones. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "Victoria was more than a case, more than a headline. She was my daughter. She was funny, stubborn, and full of dreams. Nothing can bring her back. But today the world finally knows the truth. And that matters." Maria stood beside her, silent but resolute, tears on her cheeks. The town of Willow Creek, fractured for so long, began to knit itself back together in that moment. Justice had come late. But it had come. The gavel had fallen, the cameras had packed away, and the courthouse square returned to its ordinary rhythm. Yet for Denise Anderson, the silence after the trial was its own kind of deafening. She returned to her modest house in Willow Creek, the same house where Victoria's laughter had once filled the rooms, where arguments over curfews had bounced off the walls. For years the space had felt like a tomb, frozen in time. Now, with Ray Ruiz behind bars, it felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but no longer suffocating. Denise began the slow work of reclaiming her life. She took Victoria's photos down from the refrigerator, not out of erasure but to preserve them properly, framing each one with care. She planted flowers in the front yard, the kind Victoria had loved. Sunflowers and marigolds, bold and unashamed of their color. Willow Creek itself was undergoing its own quiet transformation. The town that had once whispered about the Anderson family now spoke Victoria's name with reverence. Murals went up on old brick walls, painted by local artists. One of Victoria smiling, another of a girl with a bracelet that spelled hope. At the high school, where her absence had lingered like an unspoken wound, the gymnasium was renamed in her honor. Maria Gonzalez found herself thrust into a strange role, a reluctant advocate. The viral post she had made, the one that cracked open the silence after 12 years, had inspired others across the state to come forward with stories of missing loved ones, unresolved disappearances, and ignored pleas. Maria was overwhelmed at first, terrified of the spotlight. But she came to see it as a way to make peace with her guilt, to speak where she had once been silent. She and Denise began working together, quietly at first, then with growing confidence. They spoke at community meetings, at schools, and eventually at conferences on missing persons. Denise's voice, steady and raw, carried weight. Maria's story of guilt and courage resonated with teenagers who feared speaking out. For both women it was painful work, but healing lived inside it too. Meanwhile, Ray Ruiz sat in a state prison, his appeals rejected one by one. The man who had once prowled the streets of Willow Creek now lived behind steel bars, his fury reduced to echoes in concrete corridors. For Denise, knowing he was caged brought no joy. It was simply necessary, a safeguard for others, a boundary between the past and the future. At Victoria's grave, Denise visited often. She brought fresh flowers, sometimes a candle, sometimes just her own quiet presence. She spoke to her daughter as though the years between them had collapsed, telling her about the changing town, about Maria's courage, about the strangers who now carried her name on posters and hashtags. "People know you now," she would whisper. "Not just as a girl who vanished, but as a girl who lived, who mattered." The community found ways to keep her memory alive. Each spring, on the anniversary of her disappearance, Willow Creek held a vigil. At first, Denise dreaded them, the candles, the songs, the speeches. But over time she came to see them as a bridge. A way to take the darkness of loss and kindle something that resembled light. By the second year after the trial, Denise had founded a small nonprofit, Victoria's Voice. Its mission was simple: to support families of missing persons, to push law enforcement toward action when cases risked being dismissed as runaways. The organization began locally but soon spread, connecting families across Texas who had felt abandoned, just as Denise once had. Through it all, she never stopped missing her daughter. The ache never lessened. But it shifted. It became a companion rather than an open wound, a reminder of love so fierce it survived even the worst of endings. Maria stayed close, their friendship deepened by shared grief and shared purpose. Sometimes they laughed together, remembering Victoria's stubborn streak, her sarcasm, the way she'd sing off-key just to irritate them. Sometimes they cried, undone by the sheer unfairness of it all. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Maria said softly, "Do you ever think about what she'd be like now? If she'd stayed?" Denise nodded, her eyes misting. "All the time. She'd be 27. Maybe married. Maybe kids. Maybe still fighting me on everything under the sun." She smiled through her tears. "But I also think, maybe she's still here. In every girl who decides to speak up, in every mother who refuses to be silenced." Maria squeezed her hand. "She is." Years later, Willow Creek was no longer just the town where the girl disappeared. It became a place of remembrance, of resilience. And while some wounds never healed, they were carried with strength, not shame. Denise stood once more at her daughter's grave on the 12th anniversary of her discovery. The town gathered around her, candles flickering in the dusk. She stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "My daughter's story was one of loss. But it's also one of truth. For 12 years she was hidden. And yet she was never gone. She lived in my heart, in Maria's courage, in the voices of all who refused to forget her. And she lives on now, not as a runaway, not as a headline, but as a light that will never be extinguished." As the candles were raised, their glow spilled across the crowd, casting long shadows and bright hope alike. The night was quiet, reverent. And in that moment, for the first time in 12 long years, Denise Anderson felt peace. After 12 long years, the truth about 17-year-old Victoria Anderson finally came to light. What began as a dismissed runaway case ended with justice in the courtroom, healing for a grieving mother, and a legacy that refuses to fade. But stories like this raise questions that linger far beyond one town in Texas. What do you think? Could this tragedy have been prevented if her case had been taken seriously from the start? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective.